Welcome again, Wildcats. Today we're looking at Friday, January 5th, factoring and completing the square on page 41. If you would, update your table of contents. All right, now your table of contents are updated. Let's take a look at our notes. All right, page 41, factoring and completing the square. Solve quadratic functions by factoring or completing the square steps. Step 1, factor the equation. Step 2, if the equation is not factorable, then complete the square. Step 3, solve for x. So if you would, whoa, that was a bell. All right, with that, let's move on to the examples. All right, example number 1. Solve each of the following by factoring. If unable to factor, then solve each by completing the square. All right, so whenever you factor, you want to draw your box. First term, last term. All right, then you look, well, what makes x squared? Well, we know x and x. The next thing is, and let me zoom in a little bit. All right, the next thing is you want to know what two numbers multiplied to give you 20 and combined to be negative 12x. All right, so you want to go through, and this is the biggest thing that students struggle with is you start picking numbers and guessing. Don't do that. List all the factors and then choose one from that list, okay? And I always start with 1. So 1, and here's the thing. Because the middle number is negative and the last number is positive, both numbers have to be negative. Because a negative times a negative is a positive, and then when we combine them, it's a negative, okay? So we know that negative 1 times negative 20 is 20. Negative 2 times negative 10. Negative 3 doesn't work. Negative 4 times negative 5. And negative 5 times negative 4. Once the combination repeats, then you know you have all the factors listed. All right, so you look for the combination that will give you negative 12. Well, it is right here. So then you know it's x minus 2, x minus 10. And then you want to multiply through to check. So x times negative 2 is negative 2x. Negative 10 times x is negative 10x. Negative 10 times negative 2 is positive 20. These combine to be negative 12x, so that you know it's factored. So we know we have x minus 2 times x minus 10 equal to 0. And then you set each equal to 0 and solve. So x minus 2 equal to 0, x minus 10 equal to 0. So you add 2 to both sides, x equals 2. And then add 10 to both sides, x equals 10. All right. Now, what I would recommend if you're one of those ones that likes to try one and then watch me as I go through the problems, I would start with example 4. Okay, so that's the one we're going to do next is example 4. Okay. All right. So let's look at example 4. All right. So example 4. Now you can't factor unless everything's all on one side. So you're going to need to subtract 24x and negative 27 from both sides so that you have 3x squared minus 24x minus 27 equals 0. Now, it's example 4 is like example 1, but there's a little bit more. As you saw, we had to move things to the left. Now, there's also, unlike example 1, there's a greatest common factor. Okay, we can see that the greatest common factor is 3 because all 3 of these numbers are divisible by 3. And whenever factoring, you want to factor out the greatest common factor first. Okay, so we're going to factor out a 3. That leaves x squared minus 8x minus 9 equal to 0. And if you ever want to know if you factored out the greatest common factor correctly, multiply back through. So 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times negative 8x is negative 24x. 3 times negative 9 is negative 27. At that point, we draw a box. You're not going to worry about the 3. You're just worried about factoring this portion right here. All right, so first term, last term. Now, because the last term is negative, then we know one number will be positive, one will be negative. That's the only way to get a negative number is one positive, one negative. But before we do that, we know x and x make x squared. And again, you want to list all the factors. So 1 times negative 9, 2 doesn't work, 3 times negative 3, 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, and so on all the way to 9 times negative 1. And the reason why you want to list all the factors is because if it's not factorable, if you've listed all the factors and tried all the factors, then you've ensured yourself that you know it's not factorable. Or if you list all the factors, it's easier to find the factored pieces. Either way, we're looking for the last number to be negative 9, which all these make negative 9, and the middle number to be negative 8x. Well, the one that will work is right here. So x plus 1, x minus 9. So then you multiply 1x, negative 9x. These combine to be negative 8x and multiply to be negative 9. So we have it factored. So then we have 3 times x plus 1 times x minus 9 equal to 0. We set each equal to 0, so let's just set 3 times x plus 1 equal to 0 and x minus 9 equal to 0. So we solve. If we divide both sides by 3, well, 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 0 divided by 3 is 0, so you're just left with x plus 1 equal to 0. Subtract 1 from both sides, x equals negative 1. And then here you just add 9 to both sides, x equals 9. All right, so go ahead and finish up example 4. All right, now let's go back and let's look at example 2. All right, so you want to draw your box. First term, last term. And then we know that x times x makes x squared. Now we look at all the combinations and make negative 2. So 1 times negative 2, 2 times negative 1. Well, neither of these combinations will make negative 9, so we know that this is not factorable. All right, and it says here, if unable to factor, solve by completing the square. Okay. So we have x squared minus 9x minus 2 equal to 0. Now, what's slightly different here is before we were just factoring. Okay, so we did everything on the one side, but now we're solving. We're actually going to add this last number, add or subtract this last number. In this case, we're adding because it's negative. We're going to move it to the right side and then complete the square on the left side. Okay? So then you have x squared minus 9x equals 2. All right, so completing the square, we take the middle number, divide it by 2, and square it. So that's -9 divided by 2 squared. Now, here's the thing. If you add something to one side, you have to add it to the other side. Because remember, in an equation, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. All right, so at that point, we have x squared minus 9x, and then -9 divided by 2 squared is plus 20.25, and then 2 plus the -9 divided by 2 squared is 22.25. Now, because we complete the square, we know that this is x. We take whatever the middle number is, and that's our factor. So -9 divided by 2 is -4.5. So it's x minus 4.5 times x minus 4.5 equals 22.25. Now, remember that as you're watching these videos, at any point, if you get stuck or don't understand something, you can stop that example and wait for class, and I'll go over that example in class, okay? Don't feel like you have to follow along if you're not understanding. Remember, if you get stuck, you're like, man, you know what, I'm not understanding this. Remember, I will go back over this in class so that you can ask questions as I go over it, okay? All right, so, but if you're understanding, continue on. We'll keep going with it. Now, we know that this is x minus 4.5 squared equals 22.25. Now, at this point, we're moving into the solving process, okay? So to solve, we take the square root of both sides. So this becomes the power of 1, so you get x minus 4.5 equals this. Now, this is the, whenever you take squared, this is where y'all forgot, I believe, on the last test, is that when you take the square root, it's plus or minus. So this is actually plus or minus the square root of 22.25 is 4.717. So in solving, I think apparently looks like I've run out of space. So let me move this over to here, okay? In solving, you have to set this equal to a plus 4.717 and a negative 4.17. So you have x minus 4.5 equal to a positive 4.717, and x minus 4.5 equals to a negative 4.717. So that's important to note. Because this is both positive and negative, you have to set it equal to a positive 4.717 and a negative 4.717. So then here, you add 4.5 to both sides, so x equals 9.217. And then here you add 4.5 to both sides, you get x equals negative 0.217. And important to note is whatever the power is tells you how many solutions. Since this is x squared, you know that there's going to be 2 solutions, okay? If this was x to the third power, there'd be 3 solutions. So whatever the highest exponent power is tells you how many solutions it is. If this was x to the 10th power, then there would be 10 solutions, okay? All right, so example 3 is very similar to example 2. So if you want to try example 3 first and then follow along the video, or just follow along the video, it's up to you. Or if you had trouble with that example, you can stop there and I can go over example 3 in class, okay? All right, let's look at example 3. All right, so first thing, before you can factor, you need to move everything to one side. So we're going to subtract 12 from both sides, so then you get 2x squared plus 8x minus 12 equal to 0. Now, instead of drawing the box every time, if you know that you have to multiply to give you the last number and combine to give you the middle number, I would start with all the factors first. So all the factors of negative 12 is 1 times, oh, but wait, I almost made a mistake. Whew. Can you think about what mistake I almost made? All right, I'm hoping you saw that I didn't factor out the greatest common factor. Now you can, I think you can get away with factoring without doing that, but it makes it much more complicated. So you always want to factor out the greatest common factor. Okay, so that is 2. So then you get 2 times x squared plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Now we can find the factors. So we know 1 times negative 6, 2 times negative 3, 3 times negative 2. And I recommend doing this step first before you draw the box, because if it's not factorable, then you've just taken away so much of your working space for the box you don't need. So here, we know all these make negative 6, but none of these combinations will make a positive 4, so we know it's not factorable. All right, at that point, we're going to solve using completing the square. So now this one, because of 2, that changes a little bit, okay? So I recommend going back to the original equation, 2x squared plus 8x minus 12. And I'll show you as we work through the problem why I recommend doing that. Okay, so first thing, when you complete the square, you need to move the third number to the other side. So we're going to add 12 to both sides. So you get 2x squared plus 8x, because remember, when completing the square, you only need these two terms. So equals 12. Now, we can factor out the greatest common factor from here. So that's 2x squared plus 4x. Okay, so we complete the square. So we take this middle number, divide by 2 and squared, so plus 4 divided by 2 squared. But if you add something to one side, you have to add to the other. But here's where you have to be careful. You're not adding 4 divided by 2 squared, you're actually adding 2 times 4 divided by 2 squared. Because you can't forget about the multiplying by 2 here, okay? So then that's 2x squared plus 4x plus 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 squared is 4. And then 12 plus 2 times 4 divided by 2 squared is 16. Now we know that this is factored because we've completed the square, so we know that this 2 times whatever this term is, 4 divided by 2 is 2, so x plus 2 equals 16. And we know that this is x plus 2 squared, so that's 2 times x plus 2 squared equals 16. Now we move forward into the solving process. We divide 2 by both sides. It becomes power of 1. You get x plus 2 squared equals 8. And then we take the square root of both sides. And then that becomes the power of 1. So you have x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 8. Okay, and that's what you have to remember. Square root's always plus or minus. Okay, so you have x plus 2 equals, the square root of 8 is 2.828, and you have the negative, so x plus 2 equals negative 2.828. So you have to set them equal to both positive 2.828 and negative 2.828. Which makes sense that you have two of these because remember, it's x squared, so there's two solutions. Okay? So then you subtract 2 from both sides, x equals 0.828. And then you subtract 2 from both sides, you get x equals negative 4.828. Whoa, another bell. All right, so there you go. That's completes the example. So at this point, you have two paths or two choices you could go. You could start working, if you understood all four examples, you could start working on an assignment before class. Or if you have some questions and you want me to go back over some of the examples, you can wait till class, I go over the examples, and then start the assignment then. Either which way, as always, have a wonderful Wildcat day.